This is Chris Kelly with the second presentation in our group exercise series on exercise selection and progression for group exercise settings. And for me, the most important thing for a fitness instructor, regardless of how smart you are, how well you program, is how you coach and teach your clients. The biggest thing that you will learn from this presentation is how to progress and regress basic exercises, as well as a basic understanding of our system. The exercises that we use are pretty basic, and there's a purpose for that. I would rather be able to coach the hell out of a push-up, a squat, and a split squat than try to reinvent exercises and to coach things that I don't know. And that's the key. Be brilliant at the basics, and you will always be very successful because you will always appear as an expert. And that's what I want from all my coaches, is to be just excellent at the basic things. We will provide you all the information that you need to, be a great to give your clients a great workout, and everything to do with the system. But for you, the 99% of your job is to coach the clients through, to give them motivation, to make sure that they are doing things right, and to check their form, because that is what they pay you for. So more than anything, what I want you to get from this presentation is be a stickler for all of those things, because the clients appreciate that, and that is what sets us apart from any other fitness company. So the objectives of this presentation are to understand what we're dealing with in a group exercise setting. You'll see that we have everything from very experienced people that have been with you for years to complete beginners. And when we're talking about boot camps or even a small group setting, those people might be thrown together. So we're dealing with a lot of different issues that we have to be able to coach and recognize. We also want to understand what the essential exercises are for what we're talking about here, as well as how to coach them and progress and regress. So we'll talk about those things and how we fit all of these things in. So first and foremost, I always talk about a boot camp first, because I feel like this is something that is very popular nowadays. Large group exercise settings, be it CrossFit or boot camps or what have you, are the rage in fitness currently. And this is something where you might have people with a training age of 0 thrown in with experienced Olympic lifters, and that is a recipe for chaos if we don't have the proper coaching. So what I want you to think about doing is, how can we give the best experience possible and the best coaching possible to clients of various levels. First and foremost, one of the big things that we do is we create beginner and advanced exercise for everybody. And you might get a client that comes into you that you've never seen before. This might be their first day, and you have to be able to assess them. The way that happens is that we watch them in a large group warm up. If I have everybody circle up or performing squats and split squats, we can immediately see, number one, where they're restricted, and number two, I know immediately, I need to keep my eye on this person, I need to keep my eye on this person, because they don't necessarily do that movement pattern very well. So once you get that idea, then we can start to get a picture of, this is where I need to put this person. Something that we've also had success with is to pair beginners with more experienced boot campers. And an example of that would be a beginner that just comes in, maybe you're busy setting up circuits or whatever it may be. So you say, Jim, who's been in your boot camp for several years, I want you to partner with Frank today and teach him the foam rolling routine. Or Frank, I'm going to partner you up with Jim during this circuit. I want you two to work with one another. And Jim understands that it's his job to kind of keep his eye on Frank a little bit and make sure that he's moving through these things properly. And a lot of your clients, as long as they're coached well, will become advocates of what you do. And they will become sort of your mini coaches, your biggest helpers in the workout. And again, if you set that idea down from day one by giving them great instruction, then that is something that they are going to be happy to do. The other part of it is that we have to coach, motivate, and make sure no one hurts themselves at the same time. So that means that great music is always playing. Things are blaring loud. You keep things interesting with a good workout mix. Anytime somebody has pain or you see just a grimace on their face, it doesn't look right, sub that exercise, and then as well communicate with your clients. Keep them interested. See how they're doing. Create a Facebook group and put them in there, whatever it may be. But the bottom line is, by doing these things, you're positioning yourself as an expert. And the last point with that is that I will say that stupid jokes work very well. I have a stupid joke book. I will present that to the class. a couple dumb jokes as we go along. And the thing is that breaks up the monotony. It makes people laugh. It gets their mind off of the fact that they're busting their asses over a 60-minute period. And I think that there's value in that. So those are some of the challenges we face and some of the ways that we diffuse these challenges in a group exercise. Now, the biggest thing with teaching exercise, especially in a group setting, is recognizing how the client learns. We all have different ways of learning, be it by seeing things in a visual way, by hearing a cue and just kind of having a light bulb turn on, or by being physically pushed into that position. Okay, and with personal training clients, I like to do all of these things at the same time. I'll show the person the exercise, I will coach them through it to make sure that they can show it back to me, and then I will also give them a couple cues as we go along, so they get all of those things. Now, in a group exercise setting, you're not necessarily going to have that luxury, but what I do like to do is maybe get the group together before we have the circuit, before we start with that particular circuit or that workout, and have one person perform that as kind of the group model. Okay, once that one person does it, you can ask 2 to 3 people to do it, so you can see whether or not they're able to do it, and then you can get an idea as a coach. Okay, these are the people that I have to watch. These are people that are good. But by kind of highlighting different people in the boot camp as you go along, or the group exercise class as you go along, to demonstrate these things, once again you give them the honest to pay attention, and you kind of give them the spotlight for a minute. So I like that a lot. The other part to look at is going to be personality. Some people in group exercise settings are going to be extroverts. They're going to volunteer to do things. They're going to volunteer to help you, and they're going to be competitive types. All right, and these are people that are always talking. They light up the room, and they do very well by comparing themselves to others. They might not listen to everything that you have to say, but if you have somebody demonstrate, they don't want to look stupid next to that person. Okay, so they will actually improve as a result. You also have more solitary people, all right, that are more introverted in nature. They don't necessarily speak up in groups, okay, and we see this a lot. These are people that just may be quiet, okay, and for them, again, singling those people out early on, maybe taking them to the side, giving them a little bit of extra instruction is going to be of value for you. So one thing that I'm always doing certainly in a new group exercise class, is I'll have a roster of the clients, and I'll make notes throughout that session. This person is somebody that I maybe need to watch a little bit more. Jim is somebody that's a little bit more extroverted. I kind of see him as a leader of the group, and that's something that kind of gives you an idea of maybe these are some people that can demonstrate, these are some people that will take the lead in exercises, and maybe these are even some people that will take some of our more quiet people under their wing to try and help them. So all of those things are going to be important. Recognizing the unique needs of who we're dealing with is going to be really the key, okay? And that really is an art. That's going to take a little while, especially when you are in a larger group exercise setting. But I think that, again, grouping people up based upon the size of the group and having maybe a couple more experienced people demonstrate that for the less experienced people, and then having them demonstrate back is of great value, okay? You can show the group first, then you can maybe partner them up, have them go through the things, and then they understand exactly what. Now, in getting into our system, our workout consists of 4 components. For pre-workout, we're always going to ask our clients to show up 5 to 10 minutes early to perform foam rolling and stretching. If we've identified some issues that they're working on, with their posture, they might come a little bit earlier even and work on those things. But this would be the time. When the clock rings for the time for class to start, we're immediately going to go into our mobility drills and our movement practice. And this is important because this is an ongoing assessment. If a particular client has injured themselves that day, or you have somebody new coming into the boot camp, these 2 areas allow you to see where they are physically restricted, as well as, can this person do a squat? Can they do a push-up? Are they a beginner? From there, we're going to move into core training. All right, core training for our boot camp and our small group clients is generally going to involve core training for the anterior core, the front of the abs, the lateral core, the side, or the obliques, as well as the posterior core, the butt. In this circuit, we're also performing prehab exercises, which are just strength training or stabilization training for smaller muscles, such as the external rotators of the hips and the shoulders. the circuit training comprises the majority of our workout. Okay, this is going to be our strength training, our circuit training, our high intensity intervals, and we're generally going to do 2 circuits, which are either going to be performed in interval style, with each exercise being anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds, or if this is a smaller group training program, then we would be doing strength training, where we might say 3 sets of 6 to 8. We're always going to offer a beginner and advanced option in these, and the circuit training is going to take up the bulk of the time of the session. Now for number 4, we always condition last. We end our workout on either a high or low, depending on who you ask. But this is going to consist of high intensity interval training and circuit training geared to raise the resting metabolic rate outside of the gym and just kind of leave the clients on a high. Okay, this is a perceptual thing as much as it is anything else. But as you'll see, we definitely want you to scale per client and understand who needs this and who maybe does not. So when we're looking at foam rolling, there are a lot of different reasons to do this, but the easiest explanation that I give my clients is that I give them the analogy of rolling knots out of dough. If I sit forward at my computer all day and I have certain muscles that are going to be tightened or certain muscles that are going to be weakened, as my muscles fatigue, trigger points and lesions are going to form along those muscles and kind of restrict the tissue. So what foam rolling does is help to smooth those things out so I can move through ranges of motion more effectively. All right, what I ask my clients to do is show up 7 to 10 minutes early before their workout to perform these, and then when we move through our mobility drills, they're going to be better movers, and they're going to be able to move through full ranges of motion. What I also ask the client to do is purchase a foam roller and perform this stuff at home. They could get these at a local sporting goods store. They could certainly get these at like Playing Against Sports or even online at performbetter.com. And this is going to be our standard foam rolling routine. This is what we teach to our clients day one. So we have a series with the foam roller, as well as a series with the tennis ball, as well as a tool that we call a peanut. All right, the point of this stuff is that we will include videos for you to watch, but we need to know these because this is what we teach our clients day one. This is a standard for every client that comes into our gym. This is something that can be reproduced at home as homework, and something that when the client does have this particular area that they need to work on, like maybe their outer hip or their lats or what have you, you can say, okay, well, you know how we do it in our warm up. I just want you to focus a little bit longer on that particular area. Now, once the clock strikes the workout time, we're going to move into our warm-up. All right. So after we perform our foam rolling, then we move the muscles through a full range of motion to kind of reinforce this mobility that we're starting to build. What I also like about the warm-up, once again, is it allows us to watch our clients. If somebody is struggling that day, maybe they've tweaked their hip playing tennis that weekend, or they're just not feeling right, we can see during the warm-up the pace at which they move. They might say, oh, this movement is particularly painful today, or just whatever it may be. And that allows us to, number one, see whether the person is an advanced or a beginning mover in exercises like a squat, a push-up, a deadlift, or what have you, as well as what areas in particular are going to be restricted. That allows us to make intelligent substitutions and understand what we might be dealing with if this is a completely new client that we haven't seen before. So the first part of our warm-up consists of basic mobility drills. All right, we have 2 warm-ups that we're going to give our clients. We have a beginner warm-up, which you see here. This warm-up consists of mostly ground-based drills. All right, these things are very easy to teach. The person is able to lie on the ground, and again, they're sort of reinforced by, they're not fighting gravity necessarily by being in standing positions, and this allows them to easily mobilize and move through this circuit without too much complexity. In the beginning, when you're teaching beginners things, that's going to be key. After we perform our warm-ups, then we move into our basic movement drills. Okay, and these are always going to consist of upper body pushing movements, a squat, some sort of an upper body pulling movement, a row usually, and then a single leg movement. In watching these exercises, we can immediately see, okay, this person has pain in their left shoulder during a push-up. That probably also means that during an overhead press, during a dumbbell press, or what have you, that is also going to be the case. So we can make intelligent substitutions. distributions. When I'm watching the person squat, if the person is new, I can also say, is this person a complete beginner? Are they green? Can they squat at all? And that allows me to see beginners versus advanced clients. So there's a lot of value in these. Generally, we're going to perform these exercises as a circuit, 1 to 2 sets of 10 reps with a pace that is going to start fairly slow, and for the last several reps we want to move faster to mimic the drills that we're going to be performing during the workout. After our warm-up, we move immediately into core training. And for the majority of our clients, this is going to involve a plethora of different stabilization drills. And while crunches and leg lifts involve flexion of the torso, where I'm crunching up and down and lifting my legs, and we'll certainly do those at certain points, the majority of our drills are going to involve anti-movements. All right? And the idea is that we want to train the abs to act as a weight belt around the spine to support them, or to support our clients during long days of sitting for the computer. The reality is that the majority of our clientele are going to be weekend warriors or desk jockeys, people that are accountants, lawyers, and we just sit a lot in our society. So these type of drills help to prevent back pain and support the back just in daily life. So number one, and we have just different, and really that's just preventive movement in different directions. So we have anti-rotation, where the abs are preventing excess rotation of the torso so I don't torque my back. We have anti-extension, which is something like arching my back too much in a squat. So a plank would be a good example of how we train that. Anti-lateral flexion, where a real life example would be something like me carrying a briefcase or a purse as I'm walking down the street. If I'm not strong, if my abs are not strong enough to prevent the pull of gravity, I'm going to side flex down towards that, and one side is going to be overflexed versus the other side. So we want to use the abs to be able to maintain symmetry there. We also have anti-flexion, okay, and this is just rounding my back as I pick something up. All right, all of these drills are going to really focus on how we can prevent them with core training. Now, the majority of our drills are going to be performed anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds each, and for clients that can't maintain proper form, what we like to do is break them up. So for example, if a client can't hold in a plank for 30 seconds with good form, what I would have asked them to do is simply hold for 10, maybe rest for 5 seconds, and repeat that until they could do that full 30 seconds. Once that was the case, I then knew that they had good stabilization and they were able to progress into a harder exercise. But that allows me to focus on the quality of that movement versus trying to overwhelm the person where they have crappy form and they're still holding. So that's definitely a way that you can coach 2 different clients in the same circuit. So a word in terms of core training, I'm always thinking 3 key cues: neutral spine, bracing, and breathing. Neutral spine is simply the idea that we want to keep the back in a neutral position, meaning I'm not overly flexed, I'm not overly extended or rotated or what have you. My spine is right kind of in the middle. My abs are doing their job, they're keeping me centered, and that's what we want when we're talking about core training. And you'll see that when we get into our exercises. Bracing is simply tightening your abs to prevent being poked in the gut. Okay, and that's the example that I use with clients. Oftentimes, especially with our female clients that have had kids, they don't necessarily do this instinctually. So this is something that we definitely want to cue as we're going along. You can poke your client in the gut. Always make sure that they have a brace going on, meaning their abs are tight. And the last part is breathing. We don't want the client to tighten their abs so hard that they're not able to breathe. So as they're doing that, I'm going to coach them in what's called power breathing. I'll have them tighten their abs and hold in a plank. But at the same time, I still want them to be able to breathe in through their belly and then blow out through their lips as if blowing out a balloon. So that is going to tighten their abs. That's going to kind of facilitate this process. But long story short, just make sure that they're able to breathe. They should not have red faces as they're holding in these positions. So once again, always show the client how to do it, tell them what you want, and then physically position them into where you want them to be. If it doesn't look right, stop them. Okay, there is no problem with stopping the client and kind of cueing them into the right position. I would much rather you do that, I'm sure so would they, than it look crappy. The last point would be 360 degrees of stiffness. So always, you can walk around when your clients are holding in a plank, for example, or a dead bug, and poke them in the side oblique, poke them in the middle of their abs. There should be equal tension in all of these areas because we want them to all work together to work as a weight belt around the spine. So that's the key, and that's the first thing that we want to teach our clients is to find this neutral position. And there are a couple ways to do it. I could start with a client on their back by just telling the client to lie on their back and put their hands under their low back. All right. I'm going to tell them to press their back into the ground, but to maintain just a slight arch. Okay, that would be what would be considered a neutral spine because their abs are on, and we're kind of just repositioning them into that position. An exercise I also like is what is called a cat camel. I come into a push-up position, I arch my back as much as I can, I round my back up as much as I can like a camel, then I arch my back as much as I can like a cat, and then I find a position between those two extremes. Have the clients maybe do the full round and the full arch 5 to 6 times, and then say, find a position in the middle. And have them tighten their abs, hold in that position, just see what it feels like. That's the position that I want them to maintain as they're performing their plank. So that's kind of a good way to cue that and have them hold there before and maintain tension in their abs before we actually get into the actual core training. So in looking at these different positions, number one for me is always going to be the dead bug. I like dead bug as a starter core exercise because the client is on their back, they can brace into the ground, and they can almost use the ground as kind of training wheels to get into the right position. First and foremost, we're going to start out with a supine brace hold. Okay, we just want the client to be able to feel their abs. Okay, so what I'm going to tell them to do is to be able to breathe and brace. All right, I want them to feel that tension in their abs, have a slight arch in their low back, but no more than that, and to be able to maintain that tension without holding their breath. Once they can do that, we can then raise the feet off the ground and just hold isometrically. You can have them do a variety of positions, from extending the arms behind their body to extending the legs out or what have you. But again, they're just holding that position while bracing and breathing. The last step would be extremity movement, where the client's actually moving the arms and legs while maintaining this neutral position. And again, we want these first 2 steps, while they're fairly benign or they look fairly benign, are crucial because we want to teach the proper form. And this is building a physical foundation. If the client has these things, these are the building blocks to getting abs. That's the bottom line. But they have to know how to do these crucial things first before we can progress to the more integrated sexy exercise we might think of, from leg lifts to crunches to that sort of thing. Plank position would be the next progression from that. Plank position is a little bit harder because now I'm facing the ground, gravity is pulling down on me, and it's a bit of a harder exercise. These are both dead bug and plank are working the same muscles, which is going to be anti-extension, because again, if you can see in that plank position there, gravity is causing me or trying to pull my back into the ground. It's trying to arch me down. And if we watch people do push-ups as well, we can oftentimes see this big arch in their back. So it's pretty fair to say that those people probably don't have very good core stability, or at least control. So that's why a plank is so important. Initially with a plank, a lot of people, especially those that are fairly weak in the upper body, are going to feel that more in the upper body versus the core. So what I like to do is begin with an elevated or a wall plank. Okay, and all that is simply starting in a plank position on an elevated surface like a chair or even the wall. Once the client is fairly good in that position, they can hold for 30 seconds. Then we're going to move them into a static position on the floor. And once they can do that, then we start to move the extremities. Okay, we'll start in offset positions like you see here, where rather than just holding on the hands, we might stagger things, and then start to move into situations where the client's arms are moving, their legs are moving while maintaining this flat back. The side plank is going to be another one, and the side plank is a third progression for me. Again, this is working more anti-lateral flexion and anti-rotation, but by the same token, you'll notice that the client that I, in this picture, am on one shoulder. Okay, this is going to take a lot more control, and for our more obese clients, this is probably not going to be an option. There are different things that we can do, but the bottom line is this is a great drill, and this would be the progression. We start with just a bent leg side plank, okay, and I want the person to be essentially straight. Okay, you'll notice that there's a straight line from my shoulder down to my hip in these pictures, and as they go along, as they get better, we would just increase the stress by moving to a 3-point position where again, I'm extending my leg out, and finally I'm lifting my leg up in the air in the offset position. Again, from there, then I could start to do things like move my arms and move my legs to challenge that movement dynamic, or challenge that side plank position dynamically. And finally, we have our bridge progression. Okay, and bridge is anti-flexion. Okay, if you have a client that sits a lot at a computer, this is an essential exercise. So what I'm doing here is I'm simply holding in a glute bridge position. Okay, I move from I press my back into the ground, I tighten my abs, and I extend my hips up into the air. What I'll oftentimes have the client do is put their hands on their butt to squeeze and make sure that they're feeling this in their glutes versus their hamstrings or their quads. All right, if they are feeling that in their quads or their hamstrings, what I'll have them do is come up onto their heels. All right, a lot of clients will push excessively through the toes, so we just want to shift their weight back so they're pushing more in the middle of the foot. Now, once the client is proficient in that exercise, we'll move them to a single leg. Okay, so rather than holding on both legs, we'll move to a static single leg hold. From there, we can start to do things like marches, where I'm moving my legs back and forth, as you can see in that picture there. I can move to single leg exercises where I come up on one leg in a bridge and I start to kick out with the other leg, and we can get creative with it. But the key is they're able to perform that double leg hold first, followed by the single leg holds. Now, moving on to our circuit training, this is going to be the majority of our workout. Circuit training is going to involve 4 key patterns. Pushing, upper body push of some kind, be it a push-up, an overhead press, or what have you. Upper body pulling, okay, which is going to be pull-ups, rows, and that sort of thing. Some sort of a squatting pattern, and some sort of a hip hinge pattern. So rather than changing these exercises with every workout, maybe like a traditional boot camp, what we do is we focus on a week 1 and 3 exercise and a week 2 and 4 exercise. This allows us to revisit these at least once, and it allows the client to compare their results from week 1 to week 3. What we also try to do is vary patterns versus changing the exercise completely. So, for example, if I'm doing an overhead press in week 1, I might do a push press in week 2 versus moving to like a dip. Okay, it's still working the same basic pattern, but I varied it enough to make it different and interesting while still getting the same effect. The difficulty remains with coaching the intensity. I think with group exercise sessions, especially when we are talking about boot camps, tempo or the speed or pace that the exercise performed is going to be a key thing. With advanced clients, we're going to have them explode. Okay, we want them to move as quickly as possible, and that's what we think about with this traditional, I think, group exercise setting. But for beginners, we want to give them a count. All right, I see a lot of people doing push-ups that look spastic. They're not moving through full ranges of motion. They're just kind of moving up and down as fast as they can through a very limited range of motion. We always want to use this idea of full range of motion. So what I would have the person do is I'd say, okay, rather than going that quickly, count to 3 on the way up or count to 2 on the way up, pause at the top, and then count to 2 on the way down and pause at the bottom. It doesn't really matter how many reps they get in that situation because they're still going to get a training effect. What we want to do is stop when their form breaks down. So we're not going to physical failure with beginner clients. We're going to technical failure. Okay, when it starts to look crappy, simply stop them, have them rest for a second. Do what we discussed with the core training, where if they can't do the full 30 seconds with good form, simply have them rest for 5. Simply have them do it for 10 to 15 seconds, rest for 5, and repeat. That is the key, is just to ingrain these exercises first, and this same progression can be used for clients of all types, really regardless of how advanced they are. In looking at what I call the Big Four, our first exercise is a push-up. And while there are many, many things that we can utilize to coach the push-up, I like to just pick out a few basic form cues based upon maybe what the client is, where the client's weaknesses lie. What I'll do is I'll say, I want your back flat like a table, elbows at about 60 degrees between fully out and fully in. I want you to bring your chest down to the appropriate surface and come back up. All right, if I see that the client is maybe leading with their chest or bowing their elbows out to the side, I'll pick out a particular cue and just attempt to focus on that. If everything is wrong, what we do is we don't want to, is focus on just one thing at a time. If I can correct that basic cue, then I just move on to the next thing with the next session. The goal is not to make the client perfect on day one. It's simply to tackle the most necessary problem in that moment, all right? And then just with each subsequent session, then you work on the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. But that's the bottom line with clients that might not have done a push-up before. The other thing that I'll say with that and we'll get into this as we go along with our progressions, is always start the client in a situation that is almost too easy. If the person is new and they've never done this before, it's not realistic to immediately load them up. So start them on a wall, work on technique. They will still get a training effect, as you will see, simply because it's just new to them. Their body is going to adapt because it's never kind of seen this pattern before. So we want to look at some ways that we can progress this based upon that idea. So here's the way we progress a basic push-up. We start at an incline surface where our hands are on a bench or even a wall, and then we just move down. Okay, as you can see with the box, I'm bearing more of the weight of my body until I get to the floor, and then I can do things like even putting my feet up on a box or putting a plate on my back. Now, with variations, and again, these are things that you could do over the course of several weeks. I can move from something like a plate push-up to a single leg push-up. For week 3, I could do an inchworm push-up or even a shoulder tap push-up. What I love about the push-up is that it can be varied a million ways to make it different, but have it still be the same. So there's a lot of different ways to go with it. So don't necessarily think that just because you have a push-up on day 1 that you can't do it again the next week. Just make it a little bit different. For our next exercise, we have the squat. Okay, the squat is the most fundamental exercise, I think, in daily life. How many times a day do we bend over? How many times a day do we sit down in a chair? And when I'm teaching the squat, that's the first thing I'm going to do. The majority of clients are what we call knee squatters, okay, where they squat down and they immediately come forward on their toes because they don't know how to hinge with their hips. So what I'll tell the client to do is I will put a chair behind them and I'll say, okay, I want you to sit down in the chair. They'll stick their butt out to not fall on their face, okay, because they know that the chair is their target. All right, so I'll just say, okay, I want you to stand up and down from this chair several times in order to get an idea of what I'm looking for from a hip hinge. Once they get the general idea, then I'll just have them tap the chair. Okay, and as we move along, I might have them squat down to a smaller bench or even a medicine ball. But the idea is we give them some sort of a target to drop down to, and that gives them an idea of what to do. So I love to use cues and physical objects as a way to almost trick the client into doing the right thing. So here you can see our squat progression. And as I was saying, our first exercise is what we call a potty squat. Physically, we sit down. From there, we remove the blue pads, and we're simply moving through a full range of motion. At our gym, I have a bunch of carpet squares that I like to use. I'll also stack Eric's pads on top of one another. But the bottom line is once the client is able to get down to about 90 degrees, then we can start with a goblet squat. Okay, and the goblet squat is simply holding a dumbbell or a kettlebell in what we call the goblet position, where, again, I'm holding it up there almost at my neck, and it's physically pulling me into a good position. So that's always the first thing that we use. I really like that exercise a lot. When appropriate, we'll move to things like a barbell front squat and a back squat, but in group exercise settings, having the clients goblet squat and hold different objects, such as holding a sandbag in front, maybe holding a sandbag on their back, maybe wearing a backpack even, we'll vary up this exercise almost indefinitely. So as you can see here, here are a couple examples of that. We have an overhead squat. We have a backpack front squat where I'm literally holding my backpack in front and squatting down to a ball. We can move to a split squat, which is more of a single leg exercise, and then again a bag front squat. So think about what variations we can make on a theme versus simply changing things with every workout. Our next exercise is going to be a bodyweight row, okay, and this is basically every pulling exercise we're going to do. I simply cue the client to keep their shoulder blades down, okay, and think about pulling into their back pocket, okay. So I want them to retract their shoulder blades, kind of use their scapular muscles to pull themselves back, okay, and then pull the handle into their pocket. And again, as you can see here, our progression would be a TRX row, okay, where the client is more of an angled incline to a flat situation where we're pulling under a barbell. While this is not necessarily going to be prevalent in group exercise settings, what we can do is do the same thing with a TRX. So if you have your TRX hanging in a studio where the client can go essentially horizontal, like is the case with my barbell row here, it's the same idea. We start with the knees bent, we straighten the legs out, and then to make it even harder, we can elevate the feet on a box. So we want to move from this angled situation where we walk in to make it harder, to this horizontal situation where I have my feet extended, and then I'm even elevating my feet on a box here. Some variations that I like for this particular exercise: single leg inverted rows. We have feet on a ball. We have TRX flies, and we have pulling up with different implements such as towels and ropes. This is definitely going to be based upon your setting, but there are a million different TRX drills that you can do. There are certainly multiple implements that you can pull up with, and just be creative with it. Think outside of the box of what you can do with what you're working with versus, again, scrambling around to change it a million times. And our final exercise would be, or I guess our next exercise would be our deadlift. All right, the deadlift is, again, one of the most fundamental movements in daily life because we bend over to pick stuff up all the time. And again, it's training the hip hinge. What I'll have the client do is stand over an object, spread their legs wide, lean forward with their back flat until they feel a stretch in their hamstrings, and then bend their knees only as much as necessary to get their hands on that object. Stand up with a flat back and pick up the implement. This can be done with medicine balls. This can be done with bags. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a barbell or even a dumbbell. So, get that out of your minds. And you might have clients that never do it with those implements. But in a group exercise setting, I feel like this exercise has value for everyone because it is so fundamental. So when we're talking about progressions, if the client is having a lot of trouble with their hip hinge, they're just not able to get it because of lack of mobility or whatever, our number one sub would be a hip lift. All right, the hip lift is great because I can immediately put a dumbbell on the person's pelvis. I can weight it up a million different ways. I can put a barbell there, and they're going to feel that a lot more than they would with a traditional deadlift. It's much easier to teach because, again, it's on the ground. It's fairly benign looking. We can make it as hard as we want, but the bottom line is there's not a lot of moving parts as opposed to this standing drill on the right. So from there, once the client has a basic idea of how to hip hinge, we're going to start them out with just an elevated sumo deadlift. While I have my hands on a dumbbell here, we can certainly use medicine balls. Again, we can certainly use bags, and I've just elevated this up to give the client a little bit of range or improve range of motion a little bit for this person. Once the client is able to pick this up with a flat back and with the elevated version, then I'll move down to the floor. From there, our go-to progression would be the trap bar followed by a sumo deadlift, which isn't pictured here. But I like the trap bar because it's physically, it centers the weight a little bit better to deadlift versus leaning forward with a traditional barbell. Again, in group exercise settings, I'm not sure how prevalent this is going to be, but this gives you the same cues exist for all of these exercises, and that's going to be the key. So some variations on a theme here. We have a suitcase deadlift where I'm reaching to the side here. We have exercises called RDLs where, again, I'm keeping my legs straighter and I'm just kind of hinging down. I have a deficit deadlift where I'm standing on boxes. This one is a little bit more advanced. Make sure that your clients have the mobility to do that. If you see that their clients are restricted, especially in their hip mobility when you're warming them up, this might not be the best version for them. And then I have a single leg deadlift where, again, I'm sticking my butt out, I'm just using one leg. This would be a great sub for the deficit deadlift or for individuals with back pain. So after understanding basic cues, this is what I mean when we say basic variety. So we might say for week 1 in our push-up, we have a push-up hold. For week 2, we might do something like a shoulder tap push-up. For week 3, we would do an inchworm push-up. And so as you can see, it's different, but it's not so different that the coaching cues are different. And that's one reason why I like to keep them fairly similar, is that if you have to explain things again and again, and every week it changes, it's going to be chaos. You have a lot of people, you have a lot of moving parts, and there's just not time to do that necessarily. But if the clients understand an exercise that has been performed for a couple weeks, they're going to know the deal, and things are going to go by a lot faster. You're going to be able to get more quality in the session. So I think that that's going to be important. As far as progression goes, generally the other part of it is we want the client to get better at that particular exercise throughout the month. So client might start out with a potty squat, move to a goblet squat, and then even progress to a split squat. And this would also represent an example of exercises that would be beginner, medium, and hard. So our last section is going to be our conditioning or our finisher. By the end of the session, the client is going to be tired. They're going to have had a pretty good workout already, but we use this to just kind of bring them to the top to finish the session on a high. And this is not going to be long. This is going to be 5 to 10 minutes maybe, because it's going to be intense and it's not necessarily going to be something that they can sustain. But I want you to be very conservative with what you give the clients here. Clients already covered in sweat and they look like they're about to die. The question is, do they need this at all? Okay, or for our more experienced clients, these are the ones that are really going to benefit more so from this. But the key with this is that we can use exercises or exercise equipment such as stability balls, foam rollers, and other tools as substitutes for things like barbells and dumbbells. All right, so if the client is performing a barbell push press, but their shoulder hurts, and that's not something that they can do that day, simply hand them a foam roller. Okay, I think the foam roller is in the same shape as a barbell, but it's not going to hobble them at the same time. So as long as we get what we need, I think that's important. Conditioning is something that you should change frequently, whereas with the strength training and the circuits and even the core training, which we want to be fairly similar so the clients get better, with conditioning, we always want it to change because we want to keep the body guessing. Okay, we want the body the more efficient the body becomes at doing a movement, the less calories it's going to burn. And if that's the idea from conditioning, then again, we want to make these things as different as possible. So you can change the exercises here every time. Just make sure that the movements are going to be fairly simple. So generally with our conditioning, we're going to have 3 types of things that we do. Alactic, or what we call very, very short intervals. And for this, the exercise selection needs to be extremely basic and something that the client can execute very quickly, such as a band row, okay, or a squat. All right, it needs to be very basic so they can just do it. There's no complication, there are no moving parts the person has to think about. It just needs to be pure intensity. From there, we move on to what are called anaerobic intervals. Okay, these are exercises of moderate intensity. These are things that might be a little bit more complicated, such as burpees and maybe crawling and that sort of thing. But again, this stuff is, because it goes longer, we don't necessarily have to maintain the same level of intensity. By the same token, I like it to remain fairly simple. On Fridays, on our Friday throwdown day, or the last day of the week, we'll also do longer aerobic-based circuits where we give the client maybe 3 exercises. We say, okay, I want you to perform 3 exercises back-to-back for 8 reps each. Perform that for 8 minutes. Okay, that's much more aerobic in nature. It's going to be much easier, and it's going to allow the client to move at a more aerobic pace. You could be a little bit more liberal in terms of exercise selection there, but just recognize what is the goal and the intent of the day. So we have some examples of what I was just talking about that. So a common alactic interval would be a Tabata interval. 20 seconds of work followed by 10 seconds of rest. So we could say something like sprints on an airdyne. Sprint as hard as you can for 20 seconds, rest for 10, and repeat that for 8 rounds. That is a killer workout. Again, it's something that the client can execute very quickly, and it's not something that they have to think too much about. For anaerobic intervals, we have something like a 30 to 60 second interval. So we would say something like, all right, I want you to perform a push-up for 30 seconds of work, followed by a medicine ball, or followed by maybe a squat to stand, which is a lower intensity exercise, for a 30-second rest and recovery period. We want to repeat those things where the push-up is very intense, followed by the other recovery exercises for a period of 6 minutes. Again, it's still the same basic idea in that they're both interval-based, but the longer interval is something that is going to be a bit more moderate in nature. And then again, for our aerobic example, we have time circuits where we perform anywhere from 3 to 5 exercises back-to-back for a number of minutes. And so, again, when it comes to exercise selection, think about hard, easy. We'll always have a hard option and an easy option, but this is an area where you will have to spot correct sometimes. So let's take a typical upper body hard exercise, like a dumbbell push press. There's no reason why you can't do a foam roller push press. For the lower body, we have a kettlebell squat jump. All right, you can simply have the client swing a stability ball, okay, if they don't know how to do kettlebell swings or it's their first workout. For a total body, we might have a medicine ball slam. Okay, we can simply have the client do a stability ball slam. But as you can see, the exercises on the right, which are easy in nature, are very, very basic. They're using implements that if the client does hit themselves in the head with foam roller, they're going to be embarrassed, but it's not going to do anything. Okay, and that's the key, is that with beginners, it's always about what is the least amount of stuff that we can do to get what we need. I don't think it matters whether they're holding a barbell or whether they're holding a foam roller. As long as they get their heart rate up and it doesn't necessarily push them to the point where they're going to puke or they can't work the rest of the day because they're tired, then I think there's value in that. So just look at who you're dealing with and scale appropriately. So my top 5 stability ball conditioning exercises would be a swing, where we're swinging it like a kettlebell, a slam, where we're just slamming it up and down. That can be done very, very quickly. A front squat, where I'm squatting up and down and holding the ball in front of me. A skier, where I'm in a half squat position and just rapidly swing my arms up and down. That one's kind of ridiculous. People love that. And then we have push-ups, okay, where again the person's feet are up on the up on the stability ball and performing push-ups. This is great for people with ankle injuries or maybe somebody that needs the push-up scaled a little bit better. For the foam roller, okay, we have a push press where we're pushing the bar overhead. We have an overhead squat where we're holding the roller overhead. We have an overhead lunge where we're performing something like a walking lunge where we're walking forward. We could be doing a reverse lunge, lunging backwards, or what have you. You could also do a step up to press where I put one foot on a step and I step up and press it over my head, or duck walks where we hold the roller out in front of you, you come down into a half squat position and you walk forward. So that's the basics of my presentation. Really what I want to leave you with is simply becoming brilliant at the basics. Don't think about everything. Don't think about coaching 1,000 exercises. Think about being really good at coaching like 5 to 10. If you have those basics, the key is that with a push-up, with a squat, with a deadlift, and with a row, every other exercise is going to share those basic cues because those are the foundation. As long as you understand the foundation, you're going to be a great coach. On the subject of coaching, always understand what your client's preferred learning style is and show, physically teach, and then position them as well. And finally, when it comes to exercise selection, think variations upon a theme versus changing the pattern completely. For example, how many push-up variations can we think of versus simply changing that exercises 1,000 times during that month? Thank you so much for tuning into this presentation. I hope it wasn't too long and long-winded, but that is definitely my passion is coaching, making sure you're a great stickler in terms of what you do, and becoming brilliant in the basics. You're going to be an expert, and you're going to be recognized